Hey Edge, do you have a story from your childhood that made a big impact on you? For me, that story that I think of is Lion King. Now, I'm not talking about the new Lion King that came out like a year or two ago, although I'm sure that's great. I'm talking about the classic, the OG Lion King. I mean, that thing was amazing. If you have not seen it, please do yourself a favor and watch it. But I watched that movie so much when I was a kid, and I learned so much from it. One of the biggest things I learned is that you can't run from the issues in your life. You have to face your fears. And stories are like that, aren't they? Stories are powerful because they stick with us. I mean, I can remember stories I heard from my childhood. And not only do they stick with us, but they kind of awake emotions with us, and it leads us to action. And the other thing about stories is that the more you think about stories, the more things you can pull from them. So the thing or the lesson I got from Lion King when I was 6 years old, now that I think back on Lion King, I can pull out an entirely new lesson from the same story. And that is because stories are so powerful. In fact, they're usually the most effective way to teach someone something because it's easily remembered, engages the emotions, and can have an unlimited amount of lessons to draw from them. So, when the greatest teacher of all time, Jesus, steps onto the stage, he taught a lot in stories. We call them parables. And in this series called Storyteller, we are going to look at some of the most famous stories Jesus ever told. So today we're diving into week 1 of the Storyteller. And the first story we're looking at that Jesus tells is the one called, usually, the parable of the Prodigal Son. Before we jump into the story, let's set the scene. Luke says it this way: tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. So, in other words, bad people liked to be around Jesus. They liked being around him because he was real, he was authentic, he spoke the truth, he loved them the way they were, but he also might have also inspired them to be someone better. Bad people loved hanging out with Jesus, but this did not go over well with everybody. Luke continues, Luke 15, 1 through 2. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Now, it's easy for us to be like, whoa, those people are super judgmental. Like, who do they think they are, right? But if we start reflecting, if you've grown up in the church, or you consider yourself a good person, we can sometimes take this attitude as well. We can start thinking about other people and be like, man, they are bad people. Or we can start wondering, like, why are they here at church? Who do they think they are? Are they being fake? And we can start judging these people that are at church. A lot of you might actually resonate with the sinners that Jesus was hanging out with. And in fact, you might feel judged and maybe like you're not even welcome at church. You feel like people are looking down on you or judging you or thinking maybe you shouldn't be here. So whoever you are, feeling like you belong in church or feeling like you don't belong in church, I am willing to bet that both groups think that you need to act a certain way, behave a certain way to be able to hang out with God, to be able to have fellowship with God. And so Jesus' story is applicable to both parties. There's this audience. That's the scene that Jesus opens this story. And he actually starts with two smaller stories. He tells a story about a lost sheep. Then he tells a story about a lost coin. And then he tells the third story that we're looking at today, a lost son. And if you're familiar with Kensington Church at all, and you've been around for a while, you know that our motto here at Kensington is for the one. And that for the one phrase actually comes from these stories because we believe it's so core to who God is and what Jesus' mission and purpose on earth was that we made the whole motto of Kensington after these stories. And so be looking for what it reveals about Jesus and his heart for people. The story starts like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate." So he divided the property between them. So basically, a son told his dad, "Hey Dad, I wish you were dead, but since you're not dead, could I have my inheritance now? Because I just want what I can get from you. I really don't care about you at all." And for some reason, the dad's like, "Okay, yeah, sure." The story continues. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. This guy's like the person who wins the lottery, but doesn't know how to manage his money well, so he goes and spends it on cars and houses and wild parties, and then eventually runs out, and people are like, "Bro, you won the lottery. How are you bankrupt right now?" Right? This is this son. He's going out and he's doing all the things he's not supposed to do. He's blowing the money crazy fast, but eventually it runs out. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This guy went from being so rich to so broke that he was literally wishing he could eat pig slop. And now, in Jewish culture, this was even more humiliating because Jews considered pigs to be unclean. Scripture told them pigs were unclean. They weren't supposed to eat pigs. And so to be working with the pigs as a Jewish person would be inconceivable, the lowest of the low. And yet he's wishing he could eat what the pigs were eating. He has hit a major, major low point. Thankfully, the story doesn't end there. The story continues and says, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Now the son realizes his father is a good person and treats even his servants better than how he's living right now. And he's realized he's made a mistake. He's sinned against his father. He's messed up. So he decides, I'm going to go back, apologize, and just try to be a servant to my dad. And for the people in the audience, they probably have an idea in their mind what this would look like, right? The dad's probably going to give the son a long lecture about all the bad things he did, how he shouldn't have done it, how he was right, the son was wrong, and then take him back in, give him a place as a servant take and because really he doesn't even deserve that. The father would be totally, that would be generous of the father to take his son back and to restore him in any sort of way. But the crazy thing about this story is that it does not go how the listeners expect at all. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The father has been looking for the son, sees him from far away, runs to him, embraces him, no words necessary, embraces him. And then the son tries to give out his speech, his apology, and he says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father interrupts him, and he says, "But the father said to the servant, 'Quick, Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. He did not expect his father to not even bat an eye. He's throwing a party. He's giving them a robe and a ring and sandals, all symbols of authority and family and identity. And he's throwing a party for him. He's saying, my son was lost, but now he's found. He's dead, and now he's alive. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine being that son? Hoping that the best you can get is to be given a meal and work like a servant, and instead your father throws you a party? Now, let's remember the two groups that are listening to this story. Tax collectors and sinners, and Pharisees, the religious people. And Jesus is addressing both in this story. For the sinners in the crowd, this story was unlike anything they have ever heard. Forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption, no punishment. This was the best news ever. This is a breath of fresh air. For the Pharisees in the audience, this was shocking and made them indignant. How dare this father act this way? The son deserves punishment. He can't be trusted. What if he runs off again? He needs to learn a lesson. He needs to be made an example of. Where's the righteousness in all of this? The religious leaders would have been upset hearing this. And Jesus, knowing both sides of the audience, didn't stop the story there. He continued. He said this, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This is why Jesus is probably the best storyteller to ever live. Because he knows his audience. He knows the thoughts that both groups in the crowd are having. And he designs a story to engage both of them and to give the unexpected to both of them. And I think one of the main lessons we can take away from this is the lesson that Jesus is saying to both the Pharisees and the sinners, is that you don't have to be fixed to be found. Whether you think poorly of yourself or highly of yourself, whether you think you've got it all together or you know you've messed up and you're broken, the message is still the same. You don't have to be fixed to be found. For the younger son, Jesus is saying, I will never give up on you. And to the older son, Jesus' words might be, you should never give up on someone else. The question today is, which one are you? Do you view yourself as the younger son, the sinner, the one who doesn't quite belong in church, feels uncomfortable talking about God, feels like God might not accept you? Or are you more like the older son? Maybe you've grown up in church, you know all the right answers, you feel like you're a good person. You feel like, yeah, God and I, we're good. Which one are you? Maybe you're a mix of both. You can see both sides inside of you. It's easy to believe that our obedience leads to God's love. But what Jesus is showing in this story, and what he wants every single one of us to know, is that it's not our obedience that leads to God's love. It's God's love that leads to our obedience. Whether you think you can't come to God because of all the bad things you've done, or whether you think you've earned God's love because of all the good things you've done, Jesus dismantles that and says, no matter what you've done, you can still come into my presence. I will still love you. So, Who are you in the story? If you resonate more with the younger son, the prodigal son, the sinners and the tax collectors, then my challenge for you is this: walk towards the Father. That's all the son had to do, is realize, you know what? I've made a mistake. I need the Father. Turn around and walk home. Because as soon as you start walking home, the Father sees you, goes to you, embraces you, invites you into the party. Now, if you resonate more with the older son, my challenge for you is this: walk towards the sinner. This older son missed out on the party because he was so upset by God's grace. So the challenge for the older son is, don't be judging people you think are worse than you. Everyone is invited to God. In fact, you can help them come to Him. So, walk towards sinners. So whether the challenge is to walk towards sinners or walk towards the Father, you don't have to be fixed to be found. God will take you just as you are. And it's His love and overwhelming grace that will lead you towards change, that will lead you towards redemption. But it's that way, not the other way around. You don't have to clean up your act to come to God. You don't have to get your life together. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to walk towards the Father and let Him embrace you, love you, and bring you into the party.